On behalf of the Scott Hosier Veterans Roundtable, I'd like to welcome you to the first program of our 12th season. If you would, please take a moment to turn off any cell phones, pagers, leaf blowers, log splitters, anything else that might disturb your neighbor during the program. For those of you who are today celebrating Rosh Hashanah, I would like to wish you a Shana Tova. Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, and Shana Tova means Happy New Year. Please be sure to pick up a copy of our season brochure, the yellow brochure out in the lobby. We've got a great season planned for everyone this season, and we're doing a few things a little differently this year, so stay tuned for that. If during our program you or someone around you experiences a medical or other emergency, we have on location members of the American Red Cross to assist you. Please don't hesitate to ask them for help. They're easy to spot. They're wearing the Red Cross vest. I think there's a Red Cross out in the audience somewhere, or look for the Red Cross flag. And on behalf of the Roundtable, I'd like to thank our Red Cross volunteers for everything they do for the Roundtable and for the community. So thank you, American Red Cross volunteers. I want to remind you that the Scott Hosier Veterans Roundtable is sponsoring the Transfer of Memory exhibit at the History Center of Olmsted County now through October 30th. The Transfer of Memory exhibit features the stories and photographs of survivors of the Holocaust living in Minnesota, and including in that exhibit is Jerry Valfer, whose story you will hear tonight. And I know you're thinking, oh, the Holocaust, that's so depressing, so dreary, and certainly it is, but there is a great element of hope and survival in that exhibit. So I do urge you to go see that at the History Center. If you've never taken me up on any other suggestion for things to do and see in the Rochester area, please go out to the History Center and see the Transfer of Memory exhibit now through October 30th. Also, be sure to come back here on October 12th for our program, The Typist. One of the speakers that evening is David Klassen, who produced a film about a man named Larry Tillemans. Larry was a sergeant in the U.S. Third Army and served as a clerk typist during the Nuremberg trials. And as you probably know, the Nuremberg trials were an international tribunal which tried 24 high-level Nazis and executed 12 of them for their crimes against humanity. Both veteran Larry Tillemans and film producer David Klassen will be speaking that evening, and will be showing a screening of the short film, The Typist, and that's 7 p.m. here at the church on October 12th. As you've heard me say before, there's really three groups of people who make it possible for the Scott Hosier Veterans Roundtable to accomplish its mission. First, of course, is our veterans, and if they weren't willing to come and tell their stories to us, we wouldn't have a roundtable. And second is you, the audience, and if you weren't willing to take time out of your busy day to come listen to those stories, we wouldn't have a roundtable. The third group of people are the volunteers that make it possible. And they do so voluntarily, and some of them are veterans, some of us are not, but we all do it as a labor of love to show our appreciation and support for our veterans. And at this time, I'd like to introduce you to two new members of our officers, if they're here in the auditorium. Tammy and Andrew. Oh, good, you brought the helmet, that's good. Good thinking, thank you. Tammy Thayer is in charge of our DVD sales, and this is actually, I think, the second season that she's been doing that. Tammy is proficient in American Sign Language, and she works with hearing impaired students. She's a mother of 3 children. She comes from a family with a long history of military service. She's a descendant of Colonel Sylvanus Thayer, who is known as the father of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Her father was a career officer in the United States Air Force, and Tammy has written a book about her grandfather who served as a doctor in the U.S. Army during World War II. And by the way, it's an excellent book. It's won several literary awards. And if you don't have a copy, see Tammy after the program, and she'll get you a copy. And thank you, Tammy, for your service to the Roundtable. I'd also like to introduce Andrew Cooney. Andrew is starting the season as the treasurer of the Scott Hosier Veterans Roundtable. He's a graduate of Mayo High School, is that correct? And he served 6 years in the U.S. Navy as a Seabee. He and his wife Haley have 2 children and one on the way. Andrew works as a correctional officer, and he is currently, actually in October, he starts service with the U.S. Naval Reserve as a Seabee, which I think makes him the first ever officer of the Roundtable to be in active military service. So we thank you, Andrew, for your service both to the military and to the Roundtable. So Tammy, I understand there's a connection between you and Andrew. Could you tell the audience?
Well, I'm very proud to say he's my son.
So as we've done a couple of times last season, we have a book raffle. We're giving away a copy of the book Tammy has written about her grandfather's service. And if you were fortunate enough to fill out one of these, maybe you'll get selected. Okay, we'll let it impartial.
James Harmon.
Okay, thank you. Okay, at this time, I would like to turn our program over to our co-founder, vice president, and program chairman, Mr. Tom Hosier.
Exciting and fun to start the new program in the new year. So I'm so glad that you could come tonight. We have a program that we have called the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and there will be 3 people interviewed in one way or another. The first one, the interview was actually done last Thursday at the History Center, and it was done because this is during the Jewish holiday, and it was thought that it would be more appropriate to do it last week and then be able to show it tonight. So that will be the first thing that we'll do, and then after that I have 2 people that I will interview live, and then all of the interviewees will be available for any questions or comments after the program is done. So I'd like to introduce you to Jerry Valfer. And as you will see in the video, he was a very young man when Hitler took control in 1933, and that's essentially where our video that you'll see will begin, and then we'll have a chance to talk to you a little bit and applaud you afterwards. Okay.
All right, that sounds good. Good evening to you.
And I believe that you have a son here that came all the way from Texas?
From Texas, yeah.
Wow. Well, welcome, David. We're so glad that you could be here tonight.
Thanks.
Jerry, where did you grow up in Germany?
In Mannheim.
Mannheim. And what's that near?
Pardon me?
What near, is that near Berlin or?
No, that's
Frankfurt?
it's south of Frankfurt. It's under 50 kilometers away from the French border.
Oh, okay. And is it a big community?
Very big. It's about 300,000 population, somewhere around that area.
So then we could say about 3 times the size of Rochester.
Yeah, it's famous for Mercedes-Benz. That's where it started, and Siemens. When I was that old, Siemens started. They built an 8-story building, and that was a skyscraper then.
Oh my.
That was in the 20s I'm talking about.
Well, I don't want to go as far back as the 20s, but I think most people will know that Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933. You're not a real old person at that time, but I'd like to just kind of reflect a little bit of how it was to be a Jewish person prior to Hitler's coming to power. And so I'm thinking of, as you were a young lad, we're talking about is depression. We're talking about money isn't worth anything. Jobs are hard to find. Is this still, for a young kid that doesn't have a lot of responsibilities, is this still kind of a good time? Do you remember that as being kind of a fun time?
In the early part, it wasn't bad because really Hitler, it started after 33 when we felt that we are different than the rest of the country. You know, they started putting the Jewish people didn't make a good picture of them. They didn't start prosecuting in 33, but it didn't take very long. What the Germans did is the Nazis, I wouldn't say Germans because they're different today than they were then. But the attitude of the German people changed right away because they got indoctrinated from the Nazis and they had to do whatever they were told to do. And that's what he called dictatorship, and we see it all over in the world.
I want to try to establish a baseline and see how this is going to change. You, a Jewish person, goes to school with non-Jewish people?
Pardon me?
You, a Jewish person, goes to school with people who are not Jewish?
Right.
You're all together, integrated together?
Yeah.
You're friends, you play?
There was no problem there.
No problems at all.
Whatsoever, no.
And going back to the idea of parents, dad's trying to get a job, we're trying to eat, we're trying to make the best of this situation.
Right.
And so, as tough as that may be, there is no real discrimination that you remember during that time.
No, absolutely not.
But after Hitler comes to power, it changes.
Yeah.
And how did it change?
Well, you know, the kids got indoctrinated, especially in the school. They were told not to be together with Jewish kids, not to play with them, and sooner or later they were told not to even talk to us anymore. That happens gradually. You know.
Do you think this change of attitude happened in the school, or do you think it happened with what some of us would think of the Hitler Youth? It was something done outside of school that carried over into the school?
Into school, absolutely. That's what happened. They had to go to the Hitler Jugend, right? Which means all the young kids had to be together, and they were told to hate Jews. So naturally, when you're a kid, whatever you learn, you pick up and you do whatever you've been told. And that's how it really started.
So your memory as this starts, it's in the schools, correct?
Correct.
And at some point, you're no longer in these schools. You are now going to a lesser school.
Yes, in 1930, the end of 1936, 37, they eliminated us from going to school. So they started a Jewish school, which was not much of a school because we had no books and the teachers were not teachers. They were regular Jewish people that tried to do their best, but we really had no education anymore. That was after my 6th grade. That was the end of my education.
As you think of that time, were there other, you say the students and the German people were certainly hateful, a problem. Was there a propaganda being done over the radio or with newspapers to help them be swayed that they should think of Jewish people as bad people?
Exactly. That's exactly what happened. It came from the Nazi regime. They told their teachers and told everybody else how to handle us. And We felt it very well. We couldn't go sports anymore. We couldn't go to any kind of festivity, no place anymore. We got deprived of everything. And not only that, my parents, my father lost his job. He couldn't work anymore. And the only thing really that saved us from keep on going is because my father was 100% war invalid from the First World War.
So other Jewish fathers or Jewish families perhaps had little or no income at all.
Exactly.
And were really in dire
Really
straits
bad, yeah.
just to live.
They took everything away. And, if the world would have looked at us at that time and said, we're going to let's take some people over what they do today, that wasn't the case. No, everybody turned their face to the other way around. And I think that's exactly the opposite what happens today.
So Jerry, Hitler's not in power, things aren't too bad, we're all in this together. And it erodes to a very bad situation. Why do you think that happened? Why did people turn against the Jews?
Because they were told to do it.
But why do you think? Did you ever think back when you were younger, why are they doing this to us? We didn't do anything.
Well, I tell you what, the mentality of the Germans are like that. They always needed a leader. Even so, Germans are pretty bright people. They're cultured, they got everything else. But when it comes to politics, they always need somebody to lead them. And I think that was part of the problems which we had to suffer for.
So they're led by a madman, a crazy man, but there's this blind following. Is that how you kind of react
Exactly,
to what is going
I
on?
just couldn't put it in words. Sorry about that.
All right, so what's going to happen, Jerry? I mean, you're talking 1936, 37, and you're realizing this is really getting serious. What's going to happen?
We really didn't know. We knew things getting tough because I had a brother, and my parents made sure he got out of it. He was old enough. He was 13 then when he got out, and he got into Palestine. So my parents knew right away things are not going to go the right way. Myself, I wasn't old enough to understand everything, only what I felt, what they're doing to me by depriving me of anything, any good things in life. What happened is, when you're young and you lose your freedom, you lost everything.
So you talked about your brother, and your parents are going to find a way for him to leave.
Exactly.
And he's going to go to Palestine.
He went to Palestine.
Why don't all of you go to Palestine?
Because we didn't have the money.
Okay, so money is an
Yeah,
issue.
because that's the reason for people got killed, because they couldn't buy themselves out. Only the people that have money that could buy themselves out, really. And no country really was interested in having us.
So money is an issue.
Including the United States, by the way.
But if we had enough money to get to a neighboring nation, we were not welcome. Jewish people were not welcome. Correct?
That's exactly right. Let me tell you something about that. You know, the Danish people, it's a small country. And that's the only country that was occupied by the Germans that saved all the Jews.
All of the Jewish population in Denmark,
Yeah,
they were
they
saved.
got them out to
They
Sweden,
got 'em
and
out.
we were not too happy. 500 of us got into the camp, in the concentration camp, but we all got back except 50, which were old people. So there must, we all have to go sometimes, sooner or later.
All right, so we'd like to get out, but we
Amen.
can't. We'd like to get out, like we Jewish people would like to get out, but we can't.
That's
And your
right,
parents found a way for your brother to get
to get out there.
Palestine.
Right.
I don't want to make this too emotional and tough, but he's going to leave, you may never see him again.
Pardon me?
He's going to leave, you may never
I'll see him again. No, I probably won't.
So there is that thought.
Yeah, he's 93 years old.
Well, as it turns out, you did see him again many, many times, but there is that thought at that time, when he leaves to go to Palestine, we're not talking about going next door, he's gone,
That's right.
he's gone. All right, now, your parents have found a way for you also to leave,
Right,
to go to Palestine.
exactly.
And the date in which you are going to be able to leave is what?
That's September the 1st, 39, which was the beginning of the war.
Which was the beginning of the war, and the doors and the gates are shut.
Shut, yeah. We were supposed to leave from Trieste to Palestine.
Now, you and how many other people were together that might be able to go?
Oh, we probably were about 150 to 200.
200?
In that particular camp.
So I'm thinking that, were you in some sort of a commune or a protected area before you're going to be?
Right here behind yours, just like a farm. That's where we were. We were,
So that's where you are, waiting for your turn, and you think your turn is this September 1st.
right.
And as you are in this kind of a protected area, life was pretty good.
There was nothing wrong with that, no.
Nothing wrong with that. Now the war starts, and do you think, we'll never get out of here, it's never going to be a happy ending? Do you think that?
That's exactly what we thought about it, because we knew that was pretty close to the end of everything.
All right, and within 20 days, are you on a bus or a train to go to Denmark?
Well, we took a train and then a ferry boat over the North Sea and went to Denmark.
And there's 500.
There's 500 of us
500.
out
How
of
many are left
20,000.
that didn't get that lucky break?
Exactly.
How many, do you think?
The rest of them, I don't know how many.
1,000, 20,000?
20,000. They probably
20,000.
didn't make it, no.
You're one of 500, and that many thousand didn't get
That
to go.
didn't make it, no.
Didn't make it. All right, and I heard already, I think when your story was being read here, so we're kind of repeating it a little bit, but we're putting it in your eyes and ears now. When you're in Denmark, and you have jobs to do,
Right, worked very hard.
so you have room and board that you gain through this job or jobs, you're basically oblivious to the war. It's out of the war, Denmark is neutral, you don't really know what's going on in the war.
Not only that, I lived in a secluded area on a farm,
Okay?
and we had no telephone, no newspaper, no radio, we had nothing. We didn't even have hard running water.
Well, so Jerry, what's going to happen? Are you going to live in Denmark all of your life?
Well-
Is the war going to end? What's going to happen?
We didn't know, really didn't know. We didn't think. I didn't think because life was all right, I worked and I had food in my stomach, and we didn't think too much about the war. We didn't even realize there was a war going on until the day when I got caught in 1943.
But when you're in Denmark, you're just working and surviving, but life isn't so bad.
Right.
And
Everybody
that's how
wa-
you're living.
Yeah, everybody, the Danish people, they were as friendly, as good as anybody can be.
All right, when does that change?
That changed the night in, it was in September. It was the day of Yom Kippur. And I tell you what happened there. That had to be October the 1st at that time. There was a Danish officer a German officer, which used to live in Denmark, and he knew all about what the Nazis had in mind, to round up all the Jewish people on Yom Kippur, because they all went to the synagogue and prayed. And that was the time to catch them all. That was in Copenhagen, because mostly Jewish lived in Copenhagen. So what he did, that officer, he went to the king of Denmark, King Christian, and he told them about what's going to happen. And he rounded up all the fishermen and Danish soldiers and police. In a matter of 3-4 weeks, he got them all out to Sweden and saved every one of them, except 500.
Except you 500.
100, yeah.
And going back to the story that we heard earlier, do you feel that your presence where you were staying and living was betrayed? How did they come and get you?
No, because I didn't know anything about it. It was a Danish spy that told the Nazis where I was living.
Or other...
Yeah, by the way, that guy got hanged before the end of the war. He never made it.
All right, so you're going to be put on a train to go back to Germany. Where in Germany? Or maybe Czechoslovakia? We really don't know.
That wasn't a train, that was cattle wagons.
Well, all right, cattle wagons.
Yeah, there's a difference. Just a little bit.
I'm asking this question because each of these little phases, it puts you in a different situation.
Right.
You came from relative security, wasn't too bad, and now you are going on a cattle car
Wagon, yeah.
to
Nowhere.
What do you think?
We didn't know.
You just go.
That's it.
Where do you
That's
end
it.
up, Jerry?
I went up in Theresienstadt and in Czech, called Terezín.
In Czechoslovakia.
In Czechoslovakia.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you're in a concentration camp.
Right.
And you're there for how many days, and who are you going to find also is at that camp?
Well, in a way, somebody was telling me, maybe it was a good idea you got caught, because I met my parents in the concentration.
Can you imagine that? He came
I was gone
on
for
a train
3
to
years.
nowhere and
Yeah.
ends up with his parents, and you have had no contact.
No
with them
contact
since you
whatsoever.
went to Denmark.
From the day on I left the camp, before I never had a contact with my parents till in the camp.
Jerry, I cannot imagine what those hugs were like. That had to be an unbelievably wonderful experience. And like you said, it was almost,
And it
God
was-
said, it was almost
right.
meant to be that way.
And it was an omen, I tell you why. Because the Danes, after a few months, they sent us food packages, which came to us. They made sure we got them. When they found out my parents were there, they sent them too.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. And that's why, as far as I'm concerned, the Danish people, they're superior about everybody. They got a heart. And they will do anything for the good to anybody.
I hate to put in a little commercial here, but I think the timing is good. All of our programs are on a DVD. And the last program that Jerry and I did, the title was Denmark in the War.
Right.
And so they detail to a greater extent than what we're able to talk about tonight. You could go to our roundtable meeting Monday or any second Monday of each month, and you would have a chance to order a DVD, and you could then hear more of that story. We just don't have time for
Right.
all those stories tonight. So how long are you in this concentration camp?
I was in there for 18 months.
18 months in this camp. How's the war going?
We didn't really know, except rumors, because they wouldn't tell us anything. So we were on our own, you know. What we didn't worry about the war. We worried about ourselves to survive and exist. That's about all. And most of them there, they didn't make it anyway.
So the survival is part of it, not knowing what's going to happen to
Exactly.
us, because you did get some things to eat, as you talked about, the care packages and so forth.
Right.
All right, do you see bombers going over? All of a sudden, there's an
We've seen
indication
the Americans
that things
going
maybe aren't
over,
going so well?
We've seen the Americans going over, but that is not it. After about 7-8 months when I was there, all of a sudden, they cleaned the whole block, like a city block, and put and put stores in there, all make-believe stuff. And then all of a sudden the Red Cross came and inspected it. When they got out of there afterwards, all the people that were involved in, they sent them to Auschwitz right away.
So Germany wanted to deceive the world.
And they did a
with-
good job
with
at
the
it.
eyes of a Red Cross unit that would come and say, look at all the wonderful things that we are doing for the Jewish population. They really have no reason to fear. Life is good.
They had a concert there. Thank you. Thank you. They had a concert and they had all kinds of stuff and they showed the Red Cross how good we got it. And the people they showed is the ones that just came from Germany or Austria or wherever. They was still having food in their stomachs. So they looked like normal people. That's how they received them.
Clever deception, that's
Yeah.
all it was. All right, at some point in this concentration camp, you're going to leave.
Yes.
How does that happen?
Overnight. We didn't know anything about it till about 2 hours before. They told us to pack whatever you got, we're going to leave. They didn't tell us where. They didn't tell us where we're going to go. All of a sudden, we got in a white area. There was 40 or some, I don't know if it's 40 or 41 buses with a Red Cross on it. They were from Sweden.
White buses?
No, I don't know what kind. I don't remember. I know they had a Red Cross on them. And there was Swedish, each one of them had a Swedish driver, and then one Nazi was in there.
As a guard?
Pardon me?
As a guard?
Yeah, as a guard, yeah.
Okay, so you load the bus, all these buses, all you people. Who are the ones that get to load the buses as opposed to who are going to stay? Do you have any feel for that?
No.
You just get on?
My parents, they stayed there.
Okay, are they, do
They
you look
didn't
around
even,
and
they didn't even know I'm going to leave.
Oh, because they had done enough time. Are they all young people?
Or no, but no, they were mixed.
Mixed?
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of older people, actually, that's the ones that got caught. Either the young ones that were, like me, in remote areas, you know, where we didn't know what's going on, you know, or elderly people that couldn't get away in Copenhagen. That's what most, out of the 500 they caught, that's what the average was.
The timing of this would be maybe April 1945?
When we got liberated, yeah.
Okay, so you're on these buses, and again, it's one of those, we don't know where we're going to go. We just go. Now, I've asked you several times how the war is going. Do you have any indication how the war is going as you make observations on this trip?
Right. When we got out of Czech Republic, we had to go through Dresden, which is a big city in Germany, about twice the size as Minneapolis. And about 5-10 miles before that, all of a sudden our convoy goes into the woods, hiding. And it got dark, And about 2-3 hours later, all of a sudden, hell broke loose. The Americans bombed Dresden. They leveled it out completely. There was 80,000 casualties there in a matter of a half an hour to an hour. And, you know, Dresden was a city that had no industry. It was a cultural city.
Culture, art.
Art and everything
Yes.
else, yeah. I don't know why they did that, but that's war. In war, they do a lot of things
So
which
when
we
you
don't
start
realize.
your trip again, this city is burning.
And we had to go through that city because the Americans were there and the Russians were there. We had to go through because we could see the grenades and everything else going over. We had to make it quick.
And you know that other smaller cities, and you can see the people, this is not a good situation. If there was doubt before, there's no doubt now. Germany is going to lose the war.
Oh yeah, once we got in the car, we had a different attitude altogether.
Sure you did. And part of the urgency is we've got to get out of Germany before the Russians come. True.
Exactly.
We've got to get out of Germany because if the war ends, it's going to be utter chaos.
Very true.
So we got to get to Denmark, and from Denmark we're going to go
Sweden.
to Sweden. And did Denmark help to make this possible for you, or do
Well,
you think it came from Sweden?
Evidently, because they had a school in a city by name Odense, which is in the middle, the second largest island of Denmark. And Odense is the biggest city there. That's where Hans Christian Andersen's story started, right in that town, by the way, if you remember that. And they had a school emptied out, and so we all stayed in the school overnight because it got too much. We were on the road for 3 days altogether to get to Sweden. So it was a long trip.
When the war ends, you're in Sweden.
Right. No, I wasn't. The war wasn't all done. They were still going another month, 3 weeks more.
Yeah, but I mean,
Three
when the
more.
war ends, when it's all over, you're in Sweden.
Right, right.
There has to be a real emotional relief. It's over,
Right.
right? That's the first
Absolutely.
reaction, I think. It's over. The second, I would think, is where's my mom and dad? So how do you handle that?
There was nothing I could do at that time. And it took a long time to find out that they're still alive. Because they had no means, they had no place to go. They were liberated by the Russians. And then they were in a concentration camp for 3 years, not 1.5, 3 years. And then they had no place to go, and they put them at DP camp near Munich for another 1.5 years. And it happened so they had some nieces in New York and sponsored them over here. And that's the only way we could come over. It's not like today, they come over here and put their hands out there. It didn't work that way. I was here in this country one single day and I had to go to work.
Going back to, is there a story how you found your parents?
My parents, my brother, he was a soldier in the British Army. He got his basic training in Cairo, in Egypt, and he fought all the wars in Tobruk and El Alamein into Tunisia and then to Italy. And when the war was ended, he went back. The Israelis sent him to Europe to try to get as many Jewish people to Israel, to Palestine at that time. Since he spoke a lot of languages, it was easy for him to get them out.
So did he find your parents? And
He
help you
found
to
my
find them?
parents.
That's how it was.
Right, that's how I found.
So
And he, what he did is, he found in a camp a Jewish lady, which became his wife. She was from Poland, and got her out of Germany on a death certificate. That's the only way she could get out of there.
So when you think of how it was for your family and what happened to so many other families, every member of your family survived the war.
Yeah,
My God.
I think it's 1 out of 6 million almost.
Wow. Well, Jerry, that is an incredible story, and I think we all want to thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Jeanette. Right here.
It's almost a round table.
The next person that I'll interview is Jeanette Steiner, and I think we have a picture of Jeanette. There she is. You all recognize her, right? How old are you in that picture?
Well, it's hard for me to remember. I'm guessing 11, 12, something like that.
And are you in Warsaw?
No, this was taken after the war was over.
Okay. What are you wearing?
Well, the midi dress style was always popular, it seems to me, at least for my generation. So it's a takeoff on a sailor blouse.
No. Well, you currently live in Winona,
Yes, I do.
and your husband is here.
Oh, indeed.
That's Walter. If he could please stand. And you were born in Warsaw,
That's right.
and then you spent the next few years in an area, if we have a map here, that would be kind of in the northeast corner of Poland.
Well, we are looking at a modern map. And, my true home would be a little bit off the map in the northeast corner. In the
Because
great,
where you lived is now part of Lithuania. Is that what's happened here?
actually, it's part of Belarus.
I don't even know what that place is.
Well, it's a long, long, long story, but at one time, Belarus and Ukraine and Lithuania and the other Baltic states were a part of the Union of Soviet Republics.
Okay, so it's in that area, and it was part of the Union of Soviet Republics.
Right, right.
And you were living there on September 1st, 1939. War starts with Germany invading Poland. How old are you at that time?
Give or take a little bit, 5 years old.
5 years old. And are your parents talking about this war and what the implications of the war? Do you feel there's some concern here, some fears?
Well, it's hard to escape it. For one thing, my family raised horses. And even before we were invaded, the cavalry came to our farm and requisitioned all the horses. And like I keep saying, I was always a nosy kid. I want to see what was going on. I was watching, there I was watching bye-bye horses.
And whose cavalry are we talking about?
Oh, the Polish cavalry.
So the Polish cavalry was taking these, not the Russians, not the Germans.
No, because, Poland is invaded by Germany. That's how World War II starts. But when Poland mobilized in response to the German threat, Poland in 1939 wasn't so terribly motorized. So a lot depended on horsepower, and there was still a cavalry.
Yeah, I
They
think
needed
we kind of
good-
forget that that's how it was, and of course it changes throughout the war. So the Germans are coming from the west to invade Poland, and the Russians are coming from the northeast to get their piece of Poland. What is going to happen with your family?
Well, I do recall, see, the German invasion was long ways from us. So the first enemy to cross our doorstep were the Soviet Union forces. And one of the things that happened was my uncle was put on one of the lead tanks and given a ride all around the area. Well, everyone seemed to think he was a goner, but no, they let him get off. It's a real threat in the sense that we are landowners. Therefore, we are capitalist pigs. Mind you, Soviet Union in those days was communist. Capitalist pigs were not very well liked. So I'm trying to think how to keep it short and what to tell you.
But essentially, you're going to have a fear that they're going to take over your land. They might shoot or take away your brother and your dad, and we don't know what's going to happen to the women. Is that part of the threat and the concerns that we have now?
Oh, heavens, yes.
All right, and what are you going to do?
Well, the first step was, I always say this with a little disclaimer, but okay, the first step was for the men to take off to the woods, which left the women to face the Russian army. My mother was fortunate. She was a very attractive woman. But nobody seemed to be interested in her. And I was like a 5-year-old kid, so the two of us were pretty safe. But what happened was that the wagons pulled up on a rainy day, and all the furniture was removed out of our house. So the furniture went, and there was nothing left. Well, the handwriting on the wall is saying that we had better get the heck out of here. So it gets complicated, but we do manage to avoid the threat of Siberia and all those other things by crossing over to Poland, which is occupied by Germany. And since we also had a home in Warsaw, well, that was a logical place to go to.
So you do escape, you are a refugee, and you do escape to Warsaw.
Right.
And you're not trying to say to the audience that you had great love for the Germans either, but they seemed to be the lesser of two evil? Was that?
Exactly.
I mean, both sides have invaded your homeland, so it isn't something that you are embracing, or other Polish people.
No. We didn't like either one of them.
Well, and I think we could all understand that. We would, I'm sure, if we were living there, we would feel exactly the same. So now you are in Warsaw, and it's controlled or ruled by the Nazis. Are they friendly?
Absolutely not.
Are they intimidating?
Yes.
So a young girl has real fear of these Nazi soldiers in their uniforms.
Well, now it's hard to qualify this. You know, it's by this time I must be getting on to like 6 years old. As a kid, you know, I was protected from a lot of anxieties. My parents took good care of looking after me. But on the other hand, I was nosy. I was not blind and I was not deaf. I was particularly good at listening to what the adults were saying. So the idea that it's necessary to stay out from under the the SS and the Gestapo radar is a real necessity.
But did you get out and play as a kid with
Oh, of
other kids?
course.
I mean, you didn't lose that freedom.
No,
But
no.
there is the fear of what could happen either by bad luck or they assumed that you did something or your parents did something.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. And what does your dad do?
Well, I tried to tell you this ahead of time, but everyone had to have an identity card. I'm not sure if the kids had to have one or not, but I know my parents had to have one. And the identity card had to stipulate that, you know, you had some form of gainful employment. How you get gainful employment if you don't have a particular trade, you're displaced from your home and you have an enemy occupying your country, it's a little problematic. But, okay, my dad got a nominal job at an estate doing all kinds of handiwork, whatever. And for that he was paid milk and a loaf of bread. And my memory serves me right. This was his reward for a week's labor. So it was like however much, a liter of milk and a loaf of bread a week, but the stuff was golden.
Whereas your mother, maybe with the help of your grandmother who lived in the rural area, were they able to help you a little bit?
Well, I think my mother was an enterprising kind of a person. So it wasn't so much that my grandmother was able to help. She was hundreds of miles away. It was a couple of days travel by train just to get where she was. So what my mom did, and a lot of other people did, well, it's black market. But, you know, it's no mafia type of black market, at least not for my mom. She would take articles of clothing from neighbors, friends, whoever in Warsaw, barter them for foodstuffs in such a way that there'd be some left over for our family. And she would take the dangerous journey by train back and forth.
During this time, are you aware of the Jewish ghetto in Warsaw?
Oh, of course.
And what do you think's going on there?
In retrospect, I think, well, as far as the Warsaw Ghetto goes, in the early stages, it was almost wishful thinking. I knew that nothing good was happening to the Jewish people there. But as a kid, I wasn't quite sure what exactly. But over time, it penetrated even my childish mind that the Jewish people somehow are getting killed. And in 1943, it was April, where the much diminished ghetto population rose up in an uprising to fight the oppressors. Well, we knew very well that the fighting was going on, and it was in, well, let's see, April into May. And from where we lived, and you know, if you see a red glow on the horizon, we could see the burning of the ghetto at night.
Did you tell me that there was a neighbor across the street who was doing what she could to supply a haven for maybe young Jewish children?
Yes, no, that she did. If I remember correctly, I remember the boy very distinctly, because he was older than the rest of us kids in the block. But I think there were two little girls, not all that little, because we all played together. And the word in the neighborhood was that these were this lady's cousin's children come to visit Warsaw. Since everybody who lived in that area knew very well that there were no cousins, everybody knew that these were Jewish kids. I mean, talk about, if anybody, the risk of somebody being loose-mouthed was just tremendous. But okay, the risk apparently didn't materialize.
Did you have another neighbor that wrote for a underground newspaper?
I'm not sure if he wrote or he disseminated them. Well, if he wasn't the originator, he certainly was a member of the underground, and he passed on the bulletins. My dad used to visit him regularly. Ever so often I would eavesdrop on my family discussing what was in the bulletin. But, well, that man ended up getting at least wounded and then taken to the famous...
Auschwitz?
No. There was a prison in Warsaw. What's the bird that has this fantastic, beautiful tail? Peacock.
Peacock.
Okay, the Polish for the prison was pawiak, but if you translate it into English, it's the Peacock prison. Hardly anybody got out of there.
Was your dad a member of the underground?
That he wasn't.
1944, August?
Mm-hmm.
What happens then?
Well, the Home Army stages the Home Army uprising in the city of Warsaw.
Home Army, Polish soldiers.
Right.
Yep.
It's sort of like, if you watch enough movies, you probably are familiar with the French resistance. Well, there aren't that many movies about Polish resistance, but it's sort of the same thing. So anyway, the Polish resistance now is decided, okay, the Russians are within less than 100 miles of the city. It might be a good idea to get the Germans out of the capital city. And when the war ends, at least the Poles can claim that their own capital has been liberated by their own people, with just a little bit of help from the Russian troops.
Expected help from the Russian troops.
Yeah.
And there is a government in exile in England that if this can come to pass, then somehow there'd be a way that they could come back and take control, this Polish government. Okay.
Because by August 44, most of Poland has already been liberated by the Soviet Union.
So the Soviet Union is a close distance from Warsaw. The home army is fighting. They're really outmanned, outgunned. They need help, but they won't get it, will they?
No, because the Russian armies stop within however many miles outside of the city. And they do make a push about a month later, but by that time the uprising is pretty well crushed, so it's hard for them to recover.
Is there a story that you can share with the audience about 4 tigers? Here come the tigers.
Oh, okay. See, when the uprising started on August 1, it almost sounds like a story, it was a day like any other day, which it was. And for a while, since all the fighting was downtown, we weren't bothered. But we lived at the end of a suburban area. In my time, there was nothing in front of us anymore but a pretty good-sized lake, which is probably a slough off the Vistula, but it's big. So if we teach our people here in the U.S. in tornado drills, tornadoes coming, get into the bathtub or put as many walls between you as you can. Well, the conventional wisdom at that time was if there was any shelling or whatever, put as many walls between you as you can. That is, if you can't get down into the basement. So I do remember the word was passed on real loud, tigers are coming. Well, Tigers was the name for the German tanks. Whether it was the big Tiger tank or whether it was one of the other ones, God knows. But anyway, these tanks were coming. So they lined up across the lake from us. And they fired at as many homes as their trajectory would allow. So our home was a quadruplex. 1/2 and 1/2 with a hallway in the center. Mom grabbed me and my girlfriend and dragged us into the right-handed bathroom on the first floor. The tank chose to hit the left-hand side of the downstairs. And it's like I told Tom, it took it all out. The hallway was nothing but a mess. Where the shell came in, one wall was gone. Bathroom fixtures somehow got blown out of the bathroom and were now laying in the hallway. And people who didn't have time to get out of there were killed. But the impact was such that the burial detail, my dad and some other guys, did the job with shovels.
Let's fast forward to a German soldier or soldiers come to your house and they're going to ask you to leave?
So, well, okay, the tigers were fairly early. For a while, there was a little bit of peace. We watched the rest of the city keep burning, and refugees just pouring out of those neighborhoods that were being overtaken. But eventually, probably the last week of August, we were hit by bomber planes, but those must have been baby bombers. I mean, no big American fortress. But anyway, so our neighborhood got bombed. The bomb that ended in our backyard was a dud. The other two found their targets. One made an awful hole in the street. The other one hit a shelter. So again, it was one of those things, but since it was a dirt shelter and nobody had to worry too much about doing much burying, it was already done by the bomb. Well, I'm not sure how soon after that. A day? That's fuzzy in my mind. But we could hear a voice saying, you know, knocking on the basement door, "Get out, get out, get out." So of course we all did. And it was one of those things where you're expecting a disaster. You take precautions. So my mom had a suitcase with food and some clothing and whatever. Not a big suitcase, but anyway, buried in the peony bushes. Well, there is this soldier with his gun pointed on the doorway. Oh, and meanwhile, it was dangerous for men to be floating around, you know, even if you weren't a home army guy. You know, sometimes there were no questions, they just got shot. So my dad was hiding somewhere else. So here's my mom. Her German's awful, but her English is good. So she asks this soldier, can she please go and get her suitcase? And can she please send me to get Dad so he can be with us? The odds of having, you know, a soldier who spoke English, I don't know what they are. Maybe even in the 40s, people who learned English. Anyway, he let her go. He kept me, but told Mama to go and get her suitcase. So she got the suitcase. Okay, so there was more negotiation, but okay, this time he kept Mom, but I got to go and get my dad. And I found him in his hidey hole. I'm saying, you know, the army is here. You gotta come or you're gonna get shot. He was fortifying himself with vodka. But he was. So out he came. And the three of us then, well, okay, my aunt and my cousin, the five of us, were marching to a gathering place.
That's in an old fort or fortress, is that correct? And at that point, are they going to separate the men from essentially the women? I mean, just to put it in two different groups? Okay, so your dad is going to leave. At some point, you're going to be marched from the fortress down to the train station. And do you see your dad at some distance through a wired fence?
Yeah, it took us all night to get to the train station. And since the city was burning, if you've watched the news recently where you see the fires in the West in California, where you see skeletons of homes and just red all over the place. Well, when night fell, that's how the whole route looked. But anyway, so we get to the railroad station, and I do get a glimpse of my dad and other guys, behind a wire. So in spite of my mom's and my aunt's screams, "What are you doing?" I take off to talk to him. I couldn't get close enough in reality, but he waved and I waved, and well, at least we figured we're saying goodbye. At least that's what I was thinking. He does survive.
In fact, all of you survived. We certainly know that you survived because you wouldn't be here. But
Right.
when the war ends, your dad has survived, and your mother and your aunts, and you're going to meet at a displaced persons camp in Czechoslovakia?
It gets more, gets hairy.
Yeah, we've got to wrap this.
Yeah, that's why I thought in the in the end, my cousin, my aunt, my uncle, they stay in Warsaw. My grandma stays in Poland. But my dad and mom and I managed to get to Czechoslovakia, to Pilsen, and eventually to Germany. And eventually, with my brother's sponsorship, and a loan for you. In those days, you still had to pay for your passage across the Atlantic. So it was the Catholic Charities that put up the money. And then as soon as we got to Chicago, Dad borrowed money from an old friend to pay off the Catholic Charities. And then eventually he made enough to pay off his friend. But we were in Chicago.
And that's the end of this story. Thank you very much for sharing that.
All right, Tom, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Our next guest is Konrad Schulz-Fincke.
That's correct.
And Konrad, people are going to wonder why they don't see a picture of you and your family on the big screen. If we could bounce ahead a couple shots, they'll see, there we are. That's probably the best we could do. That shows anything about younger people. Can you see it?
Well, go ahead.
Okay. So it's really kind of a promotion, a poster for maybe Hitler Youth.
Mhm.
Where are your pictures?
I don't have a picture.
Don't have a picture.
No.
Don't have any pictures of any of your family.
The reason for that is that we lost our home through an air raid in Berlin, and all our possessions went up in flames. So, unfortunately, I don't have any pictures. And the only pictures I have are located right in here. So, go ahead, Tom.
Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Berlin, and many years ago, my dad was a lawyer, and my mom was a housewife, and I had an older brother, and that was our family in Berlin. My dad worked for the German government in statistics. He did not have a law office because in 1922, when my parents got married, the Depression, of course, was the same as it was in this country. And the paycheck you got paid every day, you better spend your money today because tomorrow it's only going to be 50% what it was today. So it was hard times. And just a short story on when my parents got married, Dad wanted to take his bride in a carriage. And he had contracted with the carriage driver. And he said, okay, and he paid him. And come the day of the marriage, and they get out of church, and the tour ends, the driver says, now I need some more money. My dad said, sorry, the horse is still alive. I paid you, and there's no more money. So the depression was very, very great. And it was similar as it was here in the United States. The bank crash of '29 devalued everything what anyone could have. So it was not only unique to this country, it was common across Europe and everywhere else, okay?
1933, Adolf Hitler comes to power. Are you aware of his leadership?
No. 1933, I was a little gent, 6 years old. You didn't care about politics. We played, we had a family. My dad was employed, and we had a family life.
Does life start to get a little better for you
Well,
with each new year?
with each year, life gets better. And when Hitler came to power in '33, after he canceled the Treaty of Versailles, which was from the First World War, he became to power after the First Reich ended with Mr. Hindenburg. To a lot of people, you may recall we had an inflatable aircraft which crashed in the late 30s in Lakehurst, New Jersey, because there was a storm and destroyed the inflatable craft. It was named the Hindenburg.
1936, maybe 37, did you see Adolf Hitler?
Oh yeah, I went to the Olympic Games and I saw Jesse Owen running, and to me it was a great event because he was a real sportsman, and there is no way that one can take this away from him or anyone. And I didn't have any qualms, even as he was a colored person, because you may eventually recall that in the 20s and also in the 1915, so forth, we had German colonies in Africa, Cameroon, German East Africa, and German West Africa. So we had colored people in Germany, so there was no difference to us, to me, or anyone else.
As you reflected on seeing Hitler for that first time, that was quite a thrill?
No, we just saw him there, that was it.
I thought you were going to say it was a thrill, and then you reflected on it later and you decided maybe it wasn't such a good thrill after all.
1936, I was 9 years old. So there's no way that you get enthusiastic about certain things.
Are you a member of the Hitler Youth?
Yeah, everyone was inducted into the Hitler Youth, which I would compare even to this day as the Boy Scouts. You went on hikes, you pitched your tent, you learned how to start a campfire. To me, there was no indoctrination of any kind. To me, it was fun as a teenager to be outside. We lived in a very affluent neighborhood in Berlin, and my brother and I, we went to public school. Our high school started with 10 years and would continue until you're 19. We had a rowboat club. We had horses. We had a good life as far as I was concerned as a teenager.
Jeanette was surprised that there was a German soldier that knew English. Did you have to learn English?
Well, in our high school, we start high school with the age of 10. So my first language was English, besides German. And the next, and included in that first year was also Latin, as it is the language of the universities if you want to become a doctor or physician. And the third year in high school, you could choose French, Arabic, Spanish, and our teachers would come from their country. We had a teacher from London who spoke English with us. There was no German language in our class when it was the English class. The same was French. And our Latin teacher, he spoke 5 different languages besides Latin. So we had a very strict and eventful education, which lasted from about 8 o'clock in the morning till about 2:30 in the afternoon. And we also had school on Saturdays. This all changed with the outbreak of the war, because bombing raids forced us into bombing shelters. Every night around 11 o'clock, the sirens would go off, and the bombing would start till about 2 o'clock in the morning. The ground was shaken, streets were destroyed, houses were destroyed, people died. So school, for us then, there was no heating in the schools, and school was for 2 hours a day where you get your assignment and you study at home.
Was the war starting to turn around against the Germans and in favor of the Allies as these bombing raids continued?
Yes, I would say it became kind of irritant to be under constant bombing raids.
Did you ever think at one time that Adolf Hitler and the Nazis would be able to rule all of Europe?
I don't think so, because my dad was drafted in the military in 1939, and he was a captain in the Air Force because he ended World War I as a lieutenant flying with the then and now so-called Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen, and he flew in biplanes. The story goes, when we ran out of ammunition, we threw the tools at each other. So, but anyway, my dad got put into the Air Force again, and he ended up in North Africa under Field Marshal Rommel. And during those times, the war in North Africa was not very nice, as no war is nice. I would like to emphasize that. And my dad became involved with the underground. And he had friends of likewise thinking that this war is not for the best.
Are you aware of the Jewish problem?
Yep. A lot of Jewish families lived in Germany. They were an intricate web of the prosperity. They were merchants. Our own physician was Jewish. And I had an aunt who was Jewish. And my dad tried to protect the friends, his Jewish and our Jewish friends, as best as he could. He even helped some of them to get into Switzerland, and from there on here to the United States. And after the war, when I came to this country in 1956, the first family who welcomed me in the United States was this family that my dad helped to flee from Germany. They lived in Alexandria, Virginia. They returned the friendship and the hospitality that we tried to give them under enormous pressure. And my dad, as I said, was part of the resistance group, and he was involved in the assassination attempt on July 20th, 1944, where a German officer, Stauffenberg, laid the suitcase under the conference table in Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia. Unfortunately, the attempt failed. However, there was the military were actively in the underground and trying to stop this massacre of death. And they paid their lives for it. And my dad at one time got pretty close to death. In the story, as I am told, was that amongst friends, he said, "We lost the war in Stalingrad, in Russia." And one of his friends did not agree with his statement and reported him to the Gestapo. My dad went on trial in October time frame in 1944. But he had a good lawyer that he had studied together with in his 20s. And they couldn't find enough evidence, so they let him go free. If it would have happened that way, I wouldn't be sitting here today. Neither would my brother or my mother.
Did your training with the Hitler Youth change as the war progresses? Did you get into an anti-aircraft battery?
Well, as a 17-year-old one, I was assigned to what one would call aircraft helper. We were in barracks, and I was trained to use the anti-aircraft double-barrel gun in the south curve of the racetrack in Berlin, the Avus. And at one night, our radar station got knocked out, and my mother, who was living in, after our house was destroyed in 43, she lived on the Baltic Sea. And so I asked for a transfer to be closer to her, because my dad was in the service, so was my brother. My brother was a paramedic in a paratrooper unit. And so I transferred to Stettin and was operating a generator for searchlight battery, and we, with our searchlight, welcomed the Allied airplanes who started to bomb the V2 factory in Peenemünde on the Baltic Sea.
V2 being a missile factory.
The missile factory. After that, I was drafted into the work corps, which you had to do for 3 months. And I built runways in East Prussia, and I guess the Russians are using it now. I remember we had also another work group building runways, and it was a sad story because those were Jewish people who were held in a camp and were forced labor to build the runway, the other runway. We were not allowed as soldiers to even contact them. We couldn't help them. They were about 500 yards away from us. So I mentioned also I had an aunt and who was Jewish, and so was our personal physician in Berlin. And Dad would meet with them, talk to them, walk with them, even in the uniform of a German Air Force officer. He was not afraid to walk with our relatives and best friends, even though they had to wear the Jewish star on their outer clothing. For me, it was terrible. And after the war, I was taken prisoner in Pilsen and ended up in a U.S. Army camp in Bavaria, POW camp. The camp was built for 5,000, and to my estimation, there was standing room only for 35,000 people. Not very pleasant. However, you stayed alive, and you were alive, and the will for living became very, very important to you. So, talking about resistance, again, there were numerous officers like Stauffenberg, Admiral Canals, Irvin Rommel, the Field Marshal in North Africa, for instance. He was in the underground, but Hitler was afraid that if he puts him on trial, that would give a revolution, because he was a war hero in the eyes of many. So they gave him a choice, either get to trial or kill himself. He took that choice and killed himself. His son, after the war, became mayor of the city of Stuttgart in southwestern Germany. And it is, for me, a great opportunity to speak to you today that yes, there was resistance against a terrible regime, and a lot of people paid their lives for it to stay in that belief. And I can only say to everyone, make sure that freedom still stays the same. Anything else you like to know?
Thank you, Konrad. If we could please stand. John Kriesel and Les Fields will play taps.